Hi, this is Steve with Thresher Media Group. Welcome to When You're Ready to Listen. This podcast is dedicated to exploring the truth about God, things you may not have understood, may not have been taught, or quite frankly, had a very hard time believing. And since our entire relationship with God rests on believing, it is important we learn how to separate the truth from the many lies and fictions that abound within the religion of Christianity. So when you're ready to listen, tune in and discover a pathway to freedom, encouragement, life, and hope. In our last podcast, we saw the armies of heaven that come with Jesus on his campaign of victory over all who oppose him. Both the angels and the bride, his wife, come with him, and being clothed in fine linen, white and clean, they are displaying the righteousness of Jesus as they join him in his victory parade. And now, Jesus is prepared for war. Episode 164, Revelation 19, verses 15 through 16, preparation for war. Revelation 19, 15 through 16. From his mouth chooses to now come a sharp sword, so that with it he may strike down the nations, and he will in the future rule them with a rod of iron. And he now treads the winepress of wine of the wrath, the furious anger of God, the Almighty. And on his robe and on his thigh he now has a name caused to having been written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. The first thing that should draw our attention to this epic scene is that it is primarily rendered in the present tense. Only once is the future tense used, which describes his future reign over the nations, which occurs after he puts down the beast and the false prophet in judgment, and then exiles Satan to the abyss for 1,000 years. Therefore, beyond describing the events of his second coming, this passage also describes the relationship Jesus has, even now, with the nations of the earth. Let's go through each element of the passage. The sword, the rod of iron, the winepress, the wine of the wrath, the furious anger of God, and the name written on his robe and thigh. The sharp sword. From his mouth chooses to now come a sharp sword, so that with it he may strike down the nations. This sword is not just any ordinary sword, like one that the Romans would carry, which in the Greek is called a machaira, which was anywhere from 24 to 33 inches. Being relatively short, the machaira was used for close and personal battles. The machaira was the type of sword which the rider of the red horse was given to take peace from the earth. If you remember, the red horse was released at the opening of the second seal. But the sharp sword which chooses to now come out of the Lord's mouth is altogether different. The Greek refers to an exceptionally large sword, which in Greek is called a rhomphaia. A rhomphaia was upwards of 57 inches, twice the size of a typical Roman sword. When we were first introduced to the resurrected Jesus, we were told that out of his mouth came this sharp two-edged sword. This imagery was used again in the letter to the church at Pergamum. This image of a large, sharp sword signifies the deadly and sharp nature of the truth, as his word is truth. His word can dissect the truth from a lie, dividing as far as the division of soul and spirit, of both joints and marrow, and able to judge the thoughts and intentions of the heart. Thus he cannot be deceived or misled, for there's no creature hidden from his sight, but all things are open and laid bare before him. He is able to penetrate the deepest of delusions with the truth. And since this is a choice that he makes to have this sword to now be coming from his mouth, this is a constant part of his nature and how he chooses to deal with mankind. And being a sharp sword, two-edged, ensures that his word goes forth and always accomplishes the task or purposes for which it was sent. It always succeeds. Since a rhomphaia was upwards of 57 inches, again, twice the size of a typical Roman sword, one could get more leverage and therefore power into a swing of this long sword. The imagery indicates that the power of Jesus' word is unimaginable. We were given a glimpse of its power the night that Jesus was arrested. The Roman troops came and asked for Jesus of Nazareth, and he said, "I am he," and they fell to the ground. His spoken word literally floored them. That is just a little foreshadow of the power that comes forth from his spoken word. Besides, if he can speak into existence all of creation, we can be sure that he is just as capable of speaking judgment and destruction on those who have rejected him. The Codex gives us a prophetic picture of his speaking judgment with the sword and the massive physical destruction of men and spiritual destruction of the hosts of heaven. In the book of Isaiah, we are given a picture of what happens when he comes to judge the nations, and a specifically vivid description of what he does to the people of Edom, who historically resided in the territory of what we know as the nation of Jordan. Isaiah chapter 34, verses 1 through 10. Draw near, O nations, to hear and listen. O peoples, let the earth and all it contains hear, and the world and all that springs from it. For Yahweh's indignation is against all the nations, and his wrath against all their armies. He has utterly destroyed them. He has given them over to slaughter. So their slain will be thrown out, and their corpses will give off their stench, and the mountains will be drenched with their blood. And all the hosts of heaven will wear away, and the sky will be rolled up like a scroll. All their hosts will also wither away as a leaf withers from the vine, or as one withers from the fig tree. For my sword is satiated in heaven. Behold, it shall descend for judgment upon Edom, and upon the people whom I have devoted to destruction. The sword of Yahweh is filled with blood. It is satiated with fat, with the blood of lambs and goats, with the fat of the kidneys of rams. For Yahweh has a sacrifice in Bozrah, and a great slaughter in the land of Edom. Wild oxen will also fall with them, and young bulls with strong ones. Thus their land will be soaked with blood, and their dust become greasy with fat. For Yahweh has a day of vengeance, a year of recompense for the cause of Zion. Its streams will be turned into pitch, and its loose earth into brimstone, and its land will become burning pitch. It will not be quenched night or day. Its smoke will go up forever. From generation to generation, it will be desolate. None will pass through it forever and ever. The imagery is clear. There will be no escaping the judgment which proceeds from the mouth of Jesus Christ, as he will be victorious over mankind and the hosts of heaven who defy him and betray the roles which he gave them to fulfill amongst the nations. No foe will stand in his way. His words are just and true, and they are righteous altogether. Therefore they will smite all upon whom they fall. A rod of iron. And he will in the future rule them with a rod of iron. This is the only part of the passage that is rendered in the future tense, and therefore points us definitively to what will be. The Greek word translated as rule literally means to tend or to shepherd. Thus, this rod of iron is a picture of a shepherd's rod. But being made of iron, the imagery communicates that his rule is unbreakable and unforgiving. Iron simply does not bend. And based on the Codex, this rod of iron has multifaceted purposes, all depending on if a person is appointed to death or to life. With one group, he will use this rod to smite them, and with another, he will use this rod to guide them. Appointed to death. This rod of iron, this unbending rod, will be used to break those who are appointed for death in this winepress of the wine of the fierce wrath of God. He shall strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips he shall kill the wicked. It is also a picture of a prophetic fulfillment regarding a promise the Father made to the Son. Ask of me, and I will make the nations your heritage, and the ends of the earth your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron, and dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. This is a dreadful image of passionate violence, and since his rod is made of iron, it is unbreakable. It will not fail in its purposes, just like his word. Appointed to life. In contrast, the righteous who remain on the earth, this image represents a promise that Jesus will shepherd or tend to the nations. Although it will be done with an unbending rod of iron, which means he will have his way. Jesus describes this process in Matthew 24, verse 29 through 31. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will in the future be caused to be darkened, and the moon will not in the future give its light, and the stars will in the future, by choice, fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will in the future be caused to be shaken. Then in the future, It will be caused to appear in heaven the sign of the Son of Man. And then all the tribes of the earth will in the future, by choice, mourn. And they will in the future, by choice, see the Son of Man choosing to now be coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great authority. And he will in the future send out his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will in the future gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. Like a shepherd, he will send his angels to gather those who survive the tribulation, and he will sit to judge them. Joel chapter 3, verse 12 through 16. Let the nations stir themselves up and come up to the valley of Jehoshaphat, for there I will sit to judge all the surrounding nations. Put in the sickle, for the harvest is ripe. Go in, tread, for the winepress is full. The vats overflow, for their evil is great. Multitudes, multitudes in the valley of decision. For the day of Yahweh is near in the valley of decision. The sun and the moon are darkened, and the stars withdraw their shining. Yahweh roars from Zion and utters his voice from Jerusalem, and the heavens and the earth quake. But Yahweh is a refuge to his people, a stronghold to the people of Israel. This passage captures the duality between his rod breaking the backs of his enemies and his rod shepherding his people to safety. And the amazing thing is that on that day, many will be joined to him, and they will let him be their shepherd. Zechariah chapter 2, verses 10 through 11. Sing for joy and be glad, O daughter of Zion, for behold, I am coming, and I will dwell in your midst, declares Yahweh. Many nations will join themselves to Yahweh in that day and will become my people. Micah chapter 4, verses 1 through 7. And it will come about in the last days that the mountain of the house of Yahweh will be established as the chief of the mountains. It will be raised above the hills, and the people will stream to it. Many nations will come and say, Come and let us go to the mountain of Yahweh and to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us about his ways and that we may walk in his paths. For from Zion will go forth the law, even the word of Yahweh from Jerusalem. And he will judge between many peoples and render decisions for mighty distant nations. Then they will hammer their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not lift up sword against nation. And never again will they train for war. Each of them will sit under his vine and under his fig tree. No one to make them afraid, for the mouth of Yahweh Sabaoth, the Lord of hosts, has spoken. Though all the peoples walk each in the name of his God, as for us, we will walk in the name of Yahweh our God forever and ever. In that day, declares Yahweh, I will assemble the lame and gather the outcasts and even those whom I have afflicted. I will make the lame a remnant and the outcasts a strong nation. And Yahweh will reign over them in Mount Zion from now on and forever. Ultimately, Jesus' return is about redemption. His rod crushes the wicked and removes the cancer from the earth. Yet at the same time, his rod shepherds those appointed to life, to safety, and redeems their lives. In fact, this is where the wife of Christ come into the storyline, as he will appoint those who now and continually hold to the testimony of Jesus to shepherd the survivors along with him, thereby fulfilling the promise he made to the church at Thyatira to give them authority over the nations. There is a passage in the Codex that covers much of this judgment and the redemption, which clearly states that he will appoint responsible shepherds to care for the nations. Jeremiah chapter 23, verses 2 through 8. Therefore, this is what Yahweh, the God of Israel, says to these shepherds. Instead of caring for my flock and leading them to safety, you have deserted them and driven them to destruction. Now I will pour out judgment on you for the evil you have done to them. But I will gather together the remnant of my flock from the countries where I have driven them. I will bring them back to their own shepherd, and they will be fruitful and increase in number. Then I will appoint responsible shepherds who will care for them, and they will never be afraid again. Not a single one will be lost or missing. I, Yahweh, have spoken. For the time is coming, says Yahweh, when I will raise up a righteous descendant from King David's line. He will be a king who rules with wisdom. He will do what is just and right throughout the land. And this will be his name, Yahweh Sidkenu, Yahweh our righteousness. In that day, Judah will be saved, and Israel will live in safety. In that day, says Yahweh, when people are taking an oath, they will no longer say, as surely as Yahweh lives, who rescued the people of Israel from the land of Egypt. Instead, they will say, as surely as Yahweh lives, who brought the people of Israel back to their own land from the land of the north and from all the countries to which he had exiled them. Then they will live in their own land. From the same rod of iron come both death and life. And we will discover, however, that those who are appointed to life will remain on the earth and be shepherded by the bondservants of God for a period of 1,000 years, a millennium, after which God will destroy the earth completely. But more on that later. The winepress. And he now treads the winepress of wine, of the wrath, the furious anger of God, the Almighty. Typically, this passage is taught as entirely apocalyptic, applying only to the activities associated with the end times, or specifically to Jesus' second coming. And while it has that application, it goes beyond just an end times event. This speaks of what now is and will continue to be in the now of every generation. The imagery here is potent. He now treads the winepress of wine, of the wrath, the furious anger of God, the Almighty. The winepress is a vat or trough where grapes are trod by foot and smashed to separate the juice from the skin. But the winepress is curious in that it is the winepress of the wine of the wrath, the furious anger of God, the Almighty. In Revelation chapter 14, verses 14 through 20, we were given another image of a winepress. But in this previous description, the winepress was referred to as the great winepress of the wrath of God. In that instance, the Greek word thumos was used, which we translate as wrath. This is the same word that is used when referring to the 7 bowls of thumos, 7 bowls of wrath. As we have learned, there is, however, another Greek word often translated as wrath, and that is orgy. This is essentially an over-the-top thumos on steroids. This sort of furious anger is that which is poured out to destroy those who are now destroying the earth. And it is poured out upon Babylon the Great. In our passage, when referring to the winepress, both thumos and orge are used together. The wrath, the furious anger of God the Almighty. This could be captured many ways, for instance, the wrath, the fierce wrath, or the wrath of the terrible anger, etc. The ignored wrath. Most of the biblical translations say he treads the winepress of the fierce wrath of God, the Almighty, or a close approximation to it. These translations fail to effectively capture the combination of thumos with orge, which tends to lessen the horrific nature of this picture. This is a place of not just wrath, but added to his wrath is God's furious anger. It's a terrifying picture. Please note that both thumos and orge are nouns, so it's not to be read as if orge is an adjective modifier to explain or give color to thumos. These are 2 separate expressions of God the Almighty, wrath and furious anger. The ignored wine. Most of the biblical translations also completely exclude the phrase of the wine. Perhaps they felt it made the passage too difficult to understand, and so they left it out altogether. It is mind-bending that anyone would choose to leave out words that the Spirit gave to John to write, difficult to understand or not. Very specifically, he now treads the winepress of wine of the wrath, the furious anger of God the Almighty. The picture does present a conceptual difficulty. Typically, one treads on grapes to squeeze out the juice, to ferment, to make wine. But in this picture, Jesus treads the winepress of wine. And the Greek is very specific that this is addressing wine that has been fermented, not grape juice. What is this communicating to us? What does the Spirit want us to discern? There are 3 previous categorical instances in the book of Revelation which are connected to wine. In the first instance, when the 3rd seal was broken, the rider on the black horse was commanded not to harm the oil and the wine. Both the oil and the wine are used in that passage as metaphors for the Spirit of God poured out upon the Jews, the oil, and the Gentile nations, the wine. In the second instance, the image of wine is connected to the concoction of immorality and abomination that the harlot, Mystery Babylon, mixed in her cup. She made all the nations, the ethnic groups, or generically the Gentile nations, drink the wine of the wrath, thumos, of her immorality. In the third instance, however, God refers to his own cup of wrath, a cup that is filled with both thumos, wrath, and orge, furious anger. Who drinks from this cup? Those who worship the beast and his image, or who receive the mark of the beast or the number of his name on his forehead or hand. They shall drink the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured without mixture, without dilution, into the cup of his furious anger. In addition, we are told that God remembers the great city Babylon the Great, aka the harlot, to give her the cup of the wine of thumos, wrath, of his orge, furious anger. He now treads the winepress of wine, of the wrath, the furious anger of God the Almighty. Perhaps this picture of him treading the winepress of wine is a consolidated picture of God bringing judgment, wrath, and furious anger on all the followers of the beast and upon those who are ensnared by the harlot and never obeyed his multiple commands to flee Babylon, flee the harlot. This judgment therefore includes all those in the household of God who were born again, but never made or exercised that choice to become a little child of God, dependent upon God for all things all the time. This picture is terrifying as Jesus is stomping on the wine in the vat of his wrath and furious anger. The Codex gives us a precursor of this sort of judgment, where the people of God, his very own, are tread as in a winepress, and it is brutal. This passage derives from the time when Yahweh sent Babylon to crush and dominate his people. Lamentations chapter 1, verses 15 through 17. Yahweh has rejected all my strong men in the midst. He has called an appointed time against me to hang up or weigh my young men. Yahweh has trodden as in a winepress the virgin daughter of Judah. For these things I weep. My eyes run down with water, because far from me is a comforter, one who restores my soul. My children are desolate because the enemy has prevailed. Zion stretches out her hands. There is no one to comfort her. Yahweh has commanded concerning Jacob that the ones around him should be his adversaries. Jerusalem has become an unclean thing among them. The point is that Jesus, the one now being called faithful and true, operating as this royal, kingly victor, is even now judging and now waging war in righteousness, and is now stomping, trampling underfoot the wine in the winepress of the fierce thumos, wrath, orge of God. The nations, the Gentiles, are being judged, and he will continue to judge until the time of his return. Let's stop here, and in our next podcast, we'll pick up with the name written on his robe and on his right thigh, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. I'm glad you tuned in and have been ready to listen. To get a free download of the full written transcript with all the scripture references footnoted, please go to threshermediagroup.com. That is THRESHER mediagroup.com. This is Steve with Thresher Media Group. When you're ready to listen, tune in.